welcome to the Recovery 2.0 conference. I'm your host, Tommy Rosen, and today I am simply delighted to be speaking with Father Richard Rohr. Richard is a globally recognized ecumenical teacher bearing witness to the universal awakening within Christian mysticism and the perennial tradition. Richard is academic dean of the Living School for Action and Contemplation. The mission of the Living School is to produce compassionate and powerfully learned individuals who will work for positive change in the world based on awareness of our common union with God and all beings. Richard, thank you so much for lending your voice to the Recovery 2.0 conference.
It's my privilege. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Richard, I've followed your work for a long time now. Really, truly a dream come true for me to speak and connect with you around your perspectives on addiction and recovery from your experience and working with people all these years. Can you begin today and shed some light on your perspectives around this thing people call addiction in all of its forms?
Well, as I say in my book, Breathing Underwater, I think what religions at the higher levels discovered was that there's one universal addiction, and that is that we're all addicted to our way of thinking. And that becomes so rigid and usually very dualistic. It's what they call all or nothing thinking in some recovery programs. And it's not just people who are formally addicted to drugs or drink or anything else, but it's really all of us. And so that became my entranceway. I'm a teacher of contemplative prayer primarily. And maybe I haven't earned the right to talk about recovery. I've never been in a 12-step program, but I've counseled. I probably should be, but but I've counseled so many people and spiritually directed so many people, and learned from them. And I see what the patterns are from that. And so that's the context from which I'm speaking.
Thank you. So for me as well, in the work that I'm doing, I've tried to help people to expand their perspective on addiction so that they might actually include themselves in this category.
Yes, I'm doing the same.
Yes. So I'm finding that once you do include yourself in that category, and we'll go with your perspective of we're certainly all addicted to our own way of seeing things.
That's right.
Once you're there, what's the end goal? Where are we trying to get to? If we're all stuck in this core addiction, which is to our own way of thinking, and that manifests itself in a lot of pain and suffering, a lot of maladaptive behaviors, if you will. Once we put down those maladaptive behaviors, that doesn't seem like the goal unto itself.
No, that's very well put. Recovery is simply recovery. What's the positive thing we're aiming for? Now, those of us from the world of religion would say the goal is union with God, union with reality, union with yourself. And so the first thing we got to do is get ourselves out of the way. So that might be called the work of recovery, that we're filled with our usually strongly held beliefs and opinions, which is really to be in love with ourselves, not with God, you see, or with reality. And so I thank you for putting it that way, because I've met people who have formally overcome their substance addiction, for example, but their rigid way of thinking and processing reality is still totally in place. So that's why just overcoming the substance addiction, perhaps, is just the first stage. That's all.
Yes. In my own experience with this, I came through fairly severe drug addiction. Thank God I survived it. Had a lot of love and support to get onto a healing of recovery. In fact, those behaviors were put aside. And then I noticed that my life got quite a bit better. And so for a number of years, I floated on that improvement. Yeah. And so the words might be, oh, well, Tommy, you're doing so much better than you were. But as I took a closer look, you see, the universe made me take a closer look. The way it does that, at least in my experience, is through pain and suffering.
That's right. I'm afraid so. Wish it were true.
Yeah. So through my pain and suffering, I took a closer look and I noticed, oh, Tommy, you're smoking cigarettes.
Well,
You're involved in difficult relationships, romantic relationships, and other relationships. You are stuck in a strange, confusing relationship with money. You gamble, you overspend. So all these areas of my life that are super important, I find that I'm still completely out of order. I'm still confused. I'm not there yet. And so the next layer of the onion is, okay, now I've put down my first layer of addictions, but I'm still not happy. I'm
yeah.
still not content. So where are we moving to? Where are we trying to get to?
Well, it's going to sound simplistic, but we are trying to get to a foundational happiness, not a superficial, I feel good about myself, but something that doesn't come and go, that isn't up and down.
Mm.
And what we're all facing in all of our addictive patterns is that deep sense of non-satisfaction or emptiness that we call unhappiness. So the goal is, Jesus says this in the Gospels, I want to give you joy and the more abundant life. It's unfortunate that we push that all off in most Christian interpretations to something called heaven later. And that just pretty much destroyed the transformative power of so much of the Christian religion and religion in general. If it's all going to come later, and all you're doing is playing a game now to get the prize later, you don't really get into transformative spirituality. And that's why I've come to admire the recovery movement so much, is you're talking at your best about transformation. Now, not heaven later. Not heaven later.
Yes.
That's key. That's really key. And I think heaven now is called happiness. Finding a foundational contentment that I don't keep grabbing out there. That'll make me happy. That'll make me happy. Either it's an inside job, or you'll recognize there's nothing external to yourself that can finally satisfy you. Nothing.
So ultimately, you're going to have to look within.
Yeah, as much of a cliche as that sounds like, it's been said by mystics and saints and prophets in all of the world religions.
Is that, in your opinion, what Jesus may have meant when he said the kingdom of heaven is within?
Of course, exactly, yeah. But we made the soul something we saved, even that word, saved till later, instead of discovered now. Can you feel the difference? I think that's what Jesus means. You're right. Yeah.
Do you mind if we speak a little bit about the teachings of Christ?
Well, of course, that's my field. So
I have no particular religious affiliation. I was born Jewish. I'm not observant in that way, but I love so much about the Jewish faith and the Jewish traditions. Yeah. I love so much about the teachings of Jesus Christ. I love so much about the teachings of the Buddha. I've investigated quite a bit in Eastern philosophy, Eastern spirituality, and I'm actually finding that in a lot of these traditions, Islam as well, Sikhism as well, Sufism as well, I'm seeing a different expression of the same ultimate truths.
Yes.
So I just want to come at it from the perspective from your work and your perspective. There are certain things that I will hear and read. For example, the meek shall inherit the earth. Other of the Beatitudes, some of the teachings are, if you get underneath them in sort of a spiritual way, which is one of the reasons I love your work, is because you do that. There's a deeper meaning to all of these things than what the words on their surface would
Absolutely.
Seem to imply.
That's the real meaning. That's it.
Okay. Can we?
Literalism is the lowest level of meaning, the least level of meaning.
Okay.
But you're getting to the spiritual level. Good.
Okay. Now, so can we talk about, for example, the meek shall inherit the earth, and what the deeper meaning of that might be?
I think in recent decades there's been a discovery, a deep discovery of the meaning of vulnerability. People like Brene Brown are doing such good work in that area to unpackage this whole thing. But I think the word that is translated meek in our English Bibles from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount could well be translated as blessed are the vulnerable. You see, only in the position of vulnerability does growth happen. As long as you're absolutely self-assured, I don't need you, you don't need me, I don't respect you, you don't respect me, no growth is going to happen. Vulnerability is always that opening of the heart space and the body space and the mind space so that something else can get in. So I think it's no surprise that's right at the beginning of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, because it's central. It's central.
And what the inheriting of the earth. So if we can be vulnerable, if we can be humble, if we can be open, we get to inherit this earth. What does that mean? The confusing part for me and for many has been, well, is that abundance? Is that money? Are we inheriting a piece of real estate? What comes as a result of this openness?
You know, I would say, no, it isn't talking about a piece of real estate. It really isn't. I mean, there are 6 billion of us on this planet. If we each want to inherit the earth, that's what I mean by the
Literal.
literalism.
Yes.
It gets you nowhere. But let's translate it this way. You will get all you need. You will get a sense of inner satisfaction, inner contentment. That's to inherit the earth when I don't need all of that stuff anymore. You know, my own father, St. Francis, that was the heart of his spiritual experience, the non-needing of material possessions because his soul was so utterly satisfied. That would be full freedom, I think, full sanctity. And we see that reflected in the Buddhist monk. We see that reflected in the Sufi mystic, and it's always at the higher levels the same conclusion.
You know, in the 12-step universe, we often read the St. Francis prayer.
Yes.
So that there's a true love and an appreciation of that energy and that concept within 12-step reality.
Yes, I know that.
Yes. So in your book, Breathing Underwater, which is incredible, by the way, and everybody who's watching this, if you're on a path of recovery or anyone you know has been affected by addiction, please do pick up this book and read it. Can you speak a little bit about the book and what moved you to write it?
Well, I guess it was, I mean, the first cassettes I made almost 25 years ago entitled Breathing Underwater, that eventually became the book, were actually inspired by what I spoke of before. That so many people who came to me, who may be halfway into the conversation, would finally admit, I don't know why it takes admission, but admit that they were in a recovery program. I again and again found them to be more humble and more honest. And when I again and again found this pattern, that the most humble and most honest people were people who again and again had hit bottom, as it were. And frankly, when you're involved in the field of religion, so many people who come using exclusively religious vocabulary, religious jargon, churchy words. I don't want to be unkind to anybody or unfair to anybody, but again and again, I found that when they talked, there was no substance to it. It was just words. It was just vocabulary.
No emotional connection.
Yeah, maybe that's the way of saying it, you know. And they didn't seem to be there. It was the presenting of a persona. Whereas what I found in people who'd gone through recovery, who'd learned to breathe underwater, that became my metaphor. There was, as you just put it, there was a self there that I feel was being presented to me. I could have an honest conversation. I didn't need to fear about offending their orthodoxy or you know, I mean, to talk to religious people, I've been a priest for almost 50 years, I mean, but to talk to religious people is often a minefield. It's just a minefield. And I again and again felt I was not in that minefield, but in a field of compassion and mercy, because they had found themselves so in need of mercy. So again and again, they were quite willing to be conduits of mercy for other people. And I just loved it. I wanted to take these people to myself. Where did you get this freedom?
Thank you.
So that's why for years, and I call the work of Bill Wilson and the 12-step program the American contribution to the history of spirituality. And why it's so American, Tommy, is that Americans are very pragmatic. Their first question is, does it work?
Right.
And what the 12-step program did is brought the whole Judeo-Christian theology out of the clouds and brought it to workability. Is it changing people? One more thing to add on to that. It's just maybe a playing with words, but I found so much of organized religion, and mind you, I'm still a priest in good standing, so I'm not trying to present myself as a rebel or something, but I found so much of organized religion transactional. Do this transaction, this attendance at a service, or this sacrament, or this bar mitzvah, or this baptism, whatever it might be. Whereas what I find the 12-step program is, it's transformational, not just transactional, if that makes any sense.
Well, yes, absolutely. The transactional seems a little bit, well, it is certainly like a business deal.
Yeah.
And it also feeds into that other malady of people who struggle with addiction, which is, people in general, that if-then thinking. Well, if I do this, then something positive will result. It can even be very mundane. Like I notice that people seem to always need an end to do a thing. So I'll go to the gym because somehow it will help my body down the road look a certain way or be a certain way. But very rarely do you hear somebody say, I'm going to go to the gym because I love the experience of being there and doing these things, just the being of it.
Yes.
I think we're missing that to a great extent in our society, and especially now with all of the technology that our young people, everybody's involved in. It seems like the distractions are going up, not down.
Oh, definitely, no doubt. Yeah.
Yes. Can you tell me in your work, the work at the Center for Action and Contemplation, you are seeing mostly people who would consider themselves to be religious people?
I would say, for the first 25 years, we largely did an internship program. We'd take people to live among the marginalized. We'd drive them. We're 3 hours from the border in Mexico to live with the poor and see how the questions they ask are so different than our middle class or upper class questions. Now we've morphed into what we call the living school. I was just teaching 48 of our students all last week. And I think that's correct, that most of them came at least from the world of religion. Now, often they're in recovery from religion. The different kind of recovery programs. They're not in reaction against it, but neither are they, bona fide Sunday go-to-meeting Catholics or Christians or Jews. They're in that what I call healthy period of self-criticism.
I'm noticing a lot, particularly in the last year, and I think there are cycles of this. I'm noticing a lot of negativity toward 12-step programs in the press. There are a couple of, the argument is always the same. The concern is the same, that this is a spiritual or religious organization which has no science behind it. They cite dismal success rates within 12-step rooms. And I'm always, and many of my colleagues are always on the defending side of the very good work that's being done in 12-step programs. And my comment has been to people, you don't want to wake up tomorrow morning in a world where there's no 12 steps. Like I don't think you'd want to be in that world in 2016. And I try to bring to people's attention how important this process is. The people who make these statements against are usually people who really ask for and desire scientific proof behind the process of transformation that's taking place when a person gets out of addiction and into recovery. They want numbers.
Sure.
They want a replicable process that can be proven over time. And I say, I want that too.
Yeah, I want that too.
But we're talking about human transformation.
Yeah, yeah.
And we're talking also about a self-proclaimed spiritual program. Mm-hmm. You must run up against this in religious circles and spiritual circles when people are saying, well, why should I do this? What's the proof? What can you.
Yeah. Well, that's the birth of the rational scientific mind, which has really only been with us for about 300 years. And it's given much to society. I'm not against it. In fact, we're now seeing a wonderful confluence of religion and science for the first time. But those who are completely committed to one way of knowing reality, they've got to realize their lens is actually rather narrow, and rather small. It doesn't recognize all the levels of transformation that the soul needs and that the soul allows. So they've determined their criteria by their own mind. Here's the dualistic mind again. And then inside those criteria, judged the 12-step program to be wanting. They would probably do the same with most religion, and I'm used to that. But what the contemplative mind actually does, which is what we teach here, is broaden your lens considerably about what life is, what death is, what real is, what unreal is. And until they see that, I'm afraid they're going to critique everything, themselves included, by a very limited set of judgments that are not in the end very helpful. It's always either or thinking. It's always all or nothing thinking.
Yes, rather than yes and.
That's right. That's right.
I like what you mentioned, the confluence of religion and science.
Yes.
Have you seen some examples of that you can cite?
Well, it's quantum physics, for example, that is just so exciting to so many of us who, for example, quantum physics now can prove what we would have called translocal effect, that you can touch this electron here and it affects an electron over there. And, now we used to call that miracles or praying or sending good energy into the world. And that was laughable to many people under the limited scientific paradigm of Newtonian physics, of cause and effect.
Yes.
As physics itself becomes bigger and bigger, now we understand things like quantum entanglement. That's a fancy word for that love here matters over there. And hatred, if I'm walking around hateful all day, in fact, I'm affecting the universe. Now, a lot of us used to think that was airy-fairy kind of poetic talk. Now, quantum physics says, no, it's probably true.
Actually provable.
Yeah, that what you and I think matters. And we can't afford to be walking around thinking negative, hateful thoughts all day. In fact, science from neuroscience, to just move to a different level, neuroscience now says that negative thoughts are like Velcro. There's an attraction in the mind to something negative. Positive thoughts are like Teflon. In fact, if you don't savor, hold on to, enjoy, participate in a moment of happiness, in a moment of goodness, they'll even go so far as to say, for 10 or 15 seconds, it just slides off. And I know that from my own watching myself, that I will find it, and this is damnable, really, so much easier to hold on to negativity, people who've offended me, people who've done me wrong. God, I can play that out for years, you know?
Mm.
And those moments of pure grace and loveliness where people look into my eyes and thank me, oh yeah, I forget it, you know? I take it for granted. I think I'm entitled to it. So good neuroscience is saying the positive is like Teflon, sorry to say. The negative is like Velcro. We now have scientific evidence that that is true.
Mm. I'd like to speak with you about contemplation.
Oh, I'd love to.
I think so few people have had experience of it. Can you talk to me about the word, its meaning, and how you use it in your practices and in your life?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I could talk for hours, so I've got to.
Yes.
This is the main thing I teach. All right. What all religions of the world discovered at the higher levels, like Kabbalistic Judaism, for example, there you can just be in it for the belonging system, which is where almost all of us start. You know, I was born Catholic, so I find myself Catholic, and that's my little tribe, and I stay there. And that of itself does not assure any high level of transformation. But what people who really stayed on inner journeys, seeking of God, seeking of truth, seeking of the good, the true, and the beautiful, discovered is that there really was a broader way of accessing reality. Now, I think historically in the biblical tradition, Jewish and Christian, we would have just called that prayer. That when Christians say, I'm going to pray about something, you know, they actually ideally meant, I'm going to put on a different head. Instead of this egocentric, what's in it for me, how can I profit and make money, I'm going to pray about it. Now, the word prayer became so trivialized by its functional use to announce things to God or ask things from God that we frankly found it less and less helpful. Already by the 3rd century of the Christian era, the desert fathers and mothers in Egypt and Syria and in Palestine and eastern Turkey came up with another word because they said the word prayer just wasn't getting people there anymore. And already that's when the word contemplation was first introduced to at least Christian vocabulary. It was held largely inside of the monasteries where we were often, not always, but often taught this different way of seeing. Now, it's what the Eastern religions would call third eye seeing, not the dualistic either or, all or nothing. That mind, Tommy, is always argumentative. It's inherently argumentative. Because once you position and live inside of the principle of two, either or, you always, for some dang reason, you always have to choose sides. And you judge one side to be better and one side to be worse. This is reaching absolutely stupid levels. I mean, look at our politics. It just makes you want to cry. We're not producing people of higher level wisdom than Republican and Democrat, as if substantial truth can be found there. And we do the same with male, female, black, white, Jew, Christian, and just choose your poison, you know.
Yes.
The contemplative mind, quite simply put, I have a whole book on this. It's called The Naked Now book. The contemplative mind, if you just want a descriptor, a clear, non-pious, non-poetic descriptor of what it's like to be a contemplative, you do not frame things either or. It's non-dual thinking, where you leave the field open, you don't choose sides, you just let it be. I don't need to categorize you as Jewish or you as white or you as anything. You're just Tommy. Right? And when you let things be what they are in their nakedness and present themselves to you, and I take away from myself my need to judge things up or down, to categorize things in or out, right or wrong, with me or against me, that is freedom. That, believe it or not, is the only way you will ever be happy.
It sounds like it leads towards compassion and forgiveness
You got it. You
and
got
love.
it. Yeah.
It also sounds like the opposite of the addictive mind.
Yeah. You've said it. That's exactly true. It's so obvious once you tell it to people. And we have all these universities and all these lawyers that we're seeing in the political debates who they're being given, without knowing it, a PhD in dualistic thinking. You know? Thinking that education is going to get them there. And I'm not against education. I couldn't be talking if I wasn't well educated. But education is not the same as transformation, you see? And that's why we still need healthy religion. Healthy religion, not unhealthy. Unhealthy religion is more a part of the problem than it is the solution. But healthy religion talks the language of transformation, just like the recovery movement does.
Thank you so much. So from this perspective, prayer, you're looking at prayer and contemplation as the same?
Let me give you the historic distinction that goes back to the 10th century in the Christian world.
Yes.
I'm going to use Latin words, but don't be. Oratio was spoken prayer. That was the lowest level, but that's where you have to start. You say prayers, right? Most people never get much beyond that, which is fine. The second level is meditatio, where you think and reflect and you ponder upon spiritual ideas, but you still use your mind, right? So oratio, spoken, meditatio, thought, contemplatio was the third level, and that's where, believe it or not, you go beyond thinking. As even Malcolm Gladwell says in his book Blink, where you think without thinking. It's an intuitive grasping of the fullness of a moment without putting it inside of the calculating mind, you see? So I'm saying it builds on prayer, but in fact it goes beyond saying prayers or even thinking prayers. It goes beyond thinking. I know that scares a lot of people. You've actually done it. In moments of great love, in moments of great suffering, you actually are apprehending reality beyond your mind.
In yogic circles, in some yogic circles, we would call that Vedanta.
I bet, yes.
Which means the end of knowledge.
There's
nowhere else to go from there.
Same thing, of course.
Yes. I really appreciate that, love that. I want to talk now about a word that I also think has been so misunderstood over the years, and that word is grace. And I'll particularly speak about it in terms of people, how they use it within recovery circles. So my story at the moment of my ego death, spiritual death, when I was at my bottom with regards to drug and alcohol use. It's 1989. I'm done. And the way that I know I'm done is I actually can't conceive of the next move.
Wow.
There's nowhere else to go now.
Yes.
There's no person there that's going to help me.
Good.
There's no money. There's certainly no girl that will come near me. Anything that I would use in the outside world that could help me get past the pain and suffering of this moment is gone. That for me was the first bottom. And I pick up the phone, I call my father. I'm going to tell him everything but the truth. He cuts right to the chase. He says, I know you're on drugs. I know you're on drugs. I need you to seek help now. I say, no, I'm not going to do it. I won't go. I don't want to do it. Not for me, not me, not me. And he starts to cry.
Wow.
Second time I heard my father cry in my life, and it got through. And there was a little door opened, and I'll say that grace shone through in that moment. And I said, Dad, I will go. Please stop crying.
Wow.
I'll get some help.
How beautiful.
A friend of mine who had been with me in these last days and who was, I'll just say, as sick as I was, didn't have that moment.
Mm.
He would spend the next 25 years suffering in and out of homeless shelters, jail, a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. People would look back and say, well, Tommy, you were graced. It was the grace of God that gave you an opportunity to get sober. Now, it's a mystery.
Yes.
Of course, it's going to fall under the category of mystery, but I always wonder what are the precursor elements, if any, to grace happening?
Yeah.
Why will some be saved and some will not be saved? And by the way, just because I'm alive in this physical frame, is that a better outcome than my poor friend who had his suffering and his pain and then ended up dying? It's so many questions come around this idea of grace. Anything you can share about that, I would be so grateful for.
Well, I believe grace is the theme of themes of the Bible. And it starts already in Exodus, where on the edge of the Red Sea, Yahweh tells Moses, Moses, you don't have to do anything. You just have to stand still. I will do the fighting for you. There it is, Exodus 14:14. Now that theme keeps getting refined and purified and returns and returns and returns. And of course, for us as Christians, we believe Jesus personifies it. But where did he learn it? He learned it from his Jewish tradition, because Jesus was nothing more than a supreme Jew. He learned it from his own ancestors. Now, I'm glad you used the word mystery, because grace is in the title of 3 of my books, and I just wrote I have daily meditations online, and I just wrote 2 weeks on the theme of grace, so I almost don't know where to start.
I'm sorry to hit you, blindside you here.
I'd love to talk about it. First of all, it's outside any realm of accountability, worthiness, earning, attaining, achieving. There's no performance principle whatsoever that can make grace happen. It always comes from nowhere, precisely. And yet, we have to say there's a necessary opening. Now, probably your love for your father allowed that opening to happen on that precious day, So something made your heart space open. You didn't earn that, but it does matter. Now, in the Christian vocabulary, that became imaged. The metaphor for it was in the yes of Mary. There's no statement of Mary being better, smart, worthy, anything. She just, yes. Maybe the yes is just 1%. Now, but even that yes, many of our saints would say, is engendered by grace. You didn't make your father call on that day. How did that happen too? So the older I get, the more I see that grace made everything happen. And yet I still want to say that your yes matters. For me, Tommy, you use the word saved, and that word also is so misused, but I think salvation is not a question of if, it's just a question of when. And I believe even your dear friend, the hell he went through in his lifetime, that was his transformational process. And I have to believe the moment when his eyes were opened was probably the great allure that happens at the moment of death, when we see what it all really meant, and that we didn't have to fight it so much. But I do think a lot of people put off heaven till the moment of death. And once we think of it that way, it's not either or. Like I say, it's a question not of if, but when. When are you going to get it? You were lucky enough to surrender to grace a little bit earlier. You're just lucky. You're blessed.
Right. There's no possible way I could take any credit for it. That's the point.
Same with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I recognize sometimes in some of our Eastern circles we'll say we remind each other you are not the doer.
That's right. I use that very phrase. You are not the doer.
And yet there's actions that need to be taken.
That's right.
It's so confusing.
Ironic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there was a phrase that some of the Desert Fathers, you never catch the wild ass by running after it, but only those who run after it catch the wild ass.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a paradox. How can both be true?
Yes.
Your running matters, and yet your running does not achieve it. See, the dualistic mind has to turn off to understand that.
Yes, yes, yes. In the path of the 12 steps, of course, and in, I think, pretty much every spiritual or religious tradition, there is a movement towards being of service to others. In fact, in the history and the founding, and the seed concept of the 12-step program is the idea that, as it's written in the book, one alcoholic has to help another alcoholic in order for this thing to actually work. Like the magic is in the helping of another who shares a common malady to what you've come through. Can you speak about service and you know, in your work and as you see it, the importance of it?
Thank you for bringing that up. I think without that element, Tommy, most spiritual talk becomes well-disguised narcissism, well-disguised. And of course, you know, it's the 12th step. It's why we named our center here in New Mexico the Center for Action and Contemplation. I actually have often shocked people by putting the word action first. But until you complete the conduit, the outflow, it usually isn't, the other end of the conduit isn't open for the inflow. In other words, if you don't give it away, you don't keep it. I don't know why that's true, but it's true of the whole universe, you know, this changing of forms between liquid and solid and vapor. It's always got to be outflowing into another form, and that puts you in the circle. That puts you in the conduit of flow. If you stop the flow in any way by not giving it away, by not loving your neighbor, as we put it, and serving, as Jesus would even say, the least of the brothers and sisters, or as he says in one of his parables, make sure you throw a party for those who can't repay you by throwing a party in return. Then it's pure flow, pure flow. Or as the Eastern traditions would say, acting without seeking the fruits of action. I serve because that's what I am. That's my existence. Not because this makes me look good, earns heaven, even because he needs it, but because it's true. I have to do the truth, you see.
Is that an actual quote from the Bible? Throwing a party for those?
That's in, is that Luke's gospel? You know, Jesus has a number of parables about wedding banquets. It seems to be his parable for eternal life. It's a giant wedding feast. And in one of them, he has people making up excuses so they don't have to come. And in one of them, I'm not sure if it's Luke or Matthew, he says, be sure to invite those who can't invite you in return and pay you back.
I love it. I just love that. That's going to become a favorite.
Hey, I'm sorry I don't have the exact citation. The good evangelicals will know exactly where that comes from.
Yes. Going back to prayer for just a moment, a lot of people that I speak with have they have a hard time with prayer, not in the sense of it's weird to them or they don't want to do it. They want to do it, but they actually don't know how to do it or how to be effective with it. In the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it gives some very basic instructions, obviously, which can be expanded upon, and the instructions there are basically not praying for something for yourself, but praying for others. unless in praying for your own success, it leads to the success or well-being of others or something like that.
Good way to put it. Yeah.
But I find that people really confused about the actual act of prayer.
Yeah.
And I'm somebody who believes wholeheartedly in the power of prayer, its place and its effectiveness as a human being. So if we could maybe speak practically about that.
Well, that's what I was just starting to get to when I said we made it into a functional problem-solving thing. And that's why the word became trivialized. Not that that's wrong. There's a place for, we call that intercessory prayer, where you intercede for the need of another person. That gets you out of your self-centeredness in the early stage. But the trouble is God becomes your little personal worker to get done what you can't get done. Whereas the higher forms of prayer were prayers of adoration, praise, and gratitude, where I'm not asking for anything. I'm just saying thank you, thank you, thank you. It's pure flow of praise or adoration or gratitude.
Yes.
That's much more contemplative prayer, which has little to do with intercession anymore. It's just remaining in the flow, so you are a conduit of life coming into the world through you and life coming toward the world out of you. That would be pure prayer. And that's why, some of the saints would say you can pray always. Now it's not verbal, it's not even mental. It's once you get in that stance, it's a life stance of openness and receptivity on both ends. You really can walk down the street, drive the car, sit on the toilet, and be praying. The distinction between sacred and profane falls apart. Churchiness is just to get you started. That's all. But you can pray always.
It's a very much a state of being.
There you go. That's it. That's it. Yes.
I want to talk about quickly, if you don't mind, about shame.
Oh, good.
It's such a problem for people who are getting better from addiction.
Yes.
I think shame, for many people that I've spoken to, sounds like I'm not good.
I'm not good.
I'm not good. If people knew I couldn't be loved, I couldn't be accepted, I'm not lovable. If you really knew me and you knew what I'm capable of, you couldn't possibly love me. Those kinds of thoughts. And then the extreme of that is I'm not lovable in God's eyes. Even God can't forgive what this is. What would you say to a person like that? People who carry those kinds of that inner dialogue.
Well, you stated it so well, and my sadness is how universal that shame is. I, as a Christian, feel we, in great part, and I mean this, we're responsible for giving that worldview. I find Jews less shame-based than Christians, in my experience, because we so used the Bible, Jesus, unbelievably, in our parenting, to shame the child into submission. And that shame that you learned as a little boy or a little girl is just, you're hardwired to feel inadequate, insecure. Whereas the whole point of the good news, the gospel, was to tell you your objective, metaphysical, ontological identity is good. Where do you get that? From Genesis. 6 times in a row, Genesis says God created it and it was good. God created it and it was good. God created it, and then the creation of man or humanity, and it was very good. Now we came along with this positive foundation that the first book in the Bible gave us, and we emphasized, instead of original blessing, original sin. I don't know, you probably didn't grow up with that vocabulary, but we Christians did, all right? It isn't even a word that's ever in the Bible. But when you start with the problem, you start by reminding people that they are inadequate Now we're 2,000 years into this. Now the mystics and saints are those who broke out of it.
Mm.
But common garden variety Christianity was often what we used to refer to as fire and brimstone, right? Reminding people of what sinners they were, you know? See, Christianity or any religion is not a moral matter, it's a mystical matter. That if we would have emphasized the mystical goodness and union, we would have cut shame at the very beginning. But I blame it a lot on parenting. And I shouldn't be blaming anybody. You know, I'm sure if I had 3 little screaming kids around the house, I would resort to shaming and blaming and screaming and, you know.
Who knows?
Yeah. It sort of works at that level. But the trouble is that is so internalized in most of us. The fear of being inadequate, even in our parents' eyes, or being unlovable, even in our parents' eyes. And when I start spiritual direction with a person, you can presume, Tommy, that 90% of a person's operative God image is a combination of their mom and their dad. It has little to do with the great, infinite God of mercy,
yes.
you know, and grace.
Yes.
It's all, and you just learn that in working with people. You know, where did that come from? Well, you find out that's the way their mom was or their dad was. I'm not trying to blame mom and dad, but what your prayer life does is leads you to an inner experience of God that leads you far beyond the faulty first hardwiring. And it does become hardwiring.
Yes.
That came from your early parenting.
Yes. I appreciate the idea that prayer and other practices can lead you out of shame to the healing.
I think it's the major way.
Yes.
No, God can do anything through great love and great suffering. But what prayer is how do you maintain what you learned in great love and great suffering for the long haul? Otherwise, you have it for a few minutes. There's that Teflon again.
Yes.
And prayer rewires this so I can live there permanently.
I think that's why we in 12-step circles live or try to live by this process of one day at a time.
Very good.
We have to do it again every day.
Every day. Me too.
I have a chronic amnesia.
I'll coach you on that.
It's terrible. Well, the last thing I wanted to bring up in our time together today was if you could give some instruction. I know that one of the challenges for some people in getting into a 12-step landscape or a religious landscape or a spiritual path tradition is that sometimes we can sense dogma, fundamentalism. When I speak to you, I feel a great openness. I feel attracted to learning more about the way you present these ideas, learning more about these teachings, because I don't feel an ounce of fundamentalism in there. But if I come up against a fundamental person who is really rigidly grasping a doctrine or a set of beliefs, and they're inviting in the sense of, come and believe this, it seems like there's a group of people out here, myself being one of them, that really doesn't work for me unless I'm given an opportunity to develop an understanding and a belief system of my own.
Yeah.
How to deal with this, because I say to people all the time, listen, what have you heard about the 12 steps that's so off-putting?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh God, some of the dogmatic beliefs, and once an addict, always an addict, and the God thing is a problem for me, and it's I say, look, you're going to be given an opportunity to figure it out for yourself through it in a beautiful open container, but unfortunately it's not always presented that way.
I predict that in the next 100 years, more and more religion is going to move to the practice level instead of the belief level. Beliefs are always something you can argue about, or look at the negative energy they're wasting on saying, I don't want to believe in God, or I don't want to believe in your dogmas. Let's just absent ourselves from that whole battle. I don't need to make you believe in anything. I really don't. But let me give you this practice, Here's where Buddhism is teaching a lot of us, Now, we had this in the Desert Fathers and Mothers and the mystics in the Catholic Church, but that was never mainline Catholicism or mainline Christianity. Protestantism, which came along in the later period, was almost entirely coterminous with the invention of the printing press, the Enlightenment, moving into the head. So Christianity became all about words and ideas and beliefs and dogmas and doctrines, and there weren't a lot of practices. So have you ever seen those little books by the Buddhist nun Pema Chodron?
Of course. Yeah. Love her work.
Brilliant. I mean, there's nothing to argue about. You just read one of her little 3-page chapters. She says, try this. Go do that. And there's nothing to argue about. You cannot disagree with it until you've done it, or you can't agree with it until you've done it. And of course, a lot of stubborn people, well, that's just stupid. I'm not going to try it. Okay, then, then you're choosing to remain stupid, Right. So I think if we'd move, we call this orthopraxy. Now, again, this was where Franciscanism, you quoted at the beginning, was called an alternative orthodoxy inside of Christianity. Francis didn't fight about dogmas and doctrines and beliefs. He just said, go out and work with the lepers. That was his practice to begin with. Work with the poor people, and you'll know all you need to know. That's orthopraxy. And see, the recovery movement is saying the same thing. Try to help at least one other alcoholic. Get inside of his pain, his suffering, and he will be your teacher. That's what I mean by practices. It's the only way we're going to get out of this trap of fighting about dogmas and doctrines. And, I'm afraid even a lot of people who fight the recovery movement, they're still trapped inside of the argumentative mind. They want to have something to dismiss. They want to have something to be cynical about. What would you be like if there was nothing to be cynical about, nothing to be dismissive of? Reality is what it is, and everything has something to teach me, everything, including the recovery movement. Just that little bit of opening could be all they need to discover their own heart. But
thank you.
The ego likes no rather than yes. It really does. The soul likes to say yes. The ego likes to say no.
I find it hard to believe we're through an hour already. Thank you.
You're easy to talk with.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Father Richard. I'm grateful to you for your time and presence. Thank you for lending your voice to the Recovery 2.0 conference. I would offer up a prayer. Father, may the war and the battle be over.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're a beautiful man.
I'm going to thank you. So great to talk to you too. How can people connect with you and your work?
We're based in Albuquerque, New Mexico, Center for Action and Contemplation. Our website is CAC, Center for Action, CAC.org, if they want to check us out.
Okay, thank you. They will want to check you out.
Eyes shine, Tommy. You're doing something right.
Thank you so much. Take good care.
God bless you, brother.
Bless.